Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I couldn't sleep. I'm awake. I've been up all night. So let's do the news, or at the very least, let's get into some interesting stories. Let's have some fun. I have a few that I want to go through. This is probably going to be the easiest and one of the fastest for me to go through. I suspect nobody is going to even know that I'm here this early in the morning. So let's do what we got. Before I do the story, I want to say this. I haven't been scouring the web to find random corners of the web picking fights on behalf of Ocasio-Cortez. That is not what's taking place. She wouldn't even come on my show. That is not what's taking place. One of my subscribers sent me this, and I'm doing this story because the facts are wrong in this, even though I understand the perspective and even agree with some elements of the perspective from the context to which this argument is being made. But there are 2 points that I want to make in this. One, facts are wrong, so this is partially debunking. But the second point is, in an interesting way, agreeing from the context. Like, look, we're all perspectives. Like, we're floating in a void, whatever that void is, with all of these perspectives, each having a perspective on one another, meaning the perspectives are relative to one another. Now, this becomes real world when you start getting into the issues of logic and how those perspectives line up with physical matter reality, or at the very least, consistent points of reference. Like if you're building a software program, is it logical or not? Does the syntax fit or not? From his context, he's looking at her and he's critiquing her from the same way that I, from my context, critique the Democratic Party. From his context, and I stress from his context. It's a different question, however, when you get into other issues of effectiveness and getting things done politically. Those become different questions. But let's talk about what he says afterwards. This cat is Jason Unruhe. Jason Unruhe is a communist. Maoist, if I'm not mistaken, unless he's changed that. He doesn't believe that Ocasio-Cortez is socialist enough. He says she's not a socialist. Very emphatic about that. She's not a socialist. And you guys are falling for another lie. She's not a socialist. You guys are falling for another lie. And to kind of make his point, he shows something that I debunked on my channel the day she got elected, or the very next night she got elected. So I'm going to play his video. Let me say one thing before, or I guess this is the second or third thing. This is not me picking the fight. I'm fascinated by Jason Unruhe. That's his name, Jason Unruhe. I came across his channel, I think maybe several months ago, when I think it was a debate between him and Sargon. And I was like, he's a Maoist. Like, what the hell? That exists? And so I end up on his channel, and I end up like binge watching like a shitload of his videos. Not necessarily because I'm agreeing with him in the content, but more so I'm more enamored with the personality that's presenting the material. He's at one point he has this massive mohawk. I mean, look at this. Like, this is not me. I didn't digitize that in the background. That was the shit that was on the channel. So yeah, I was enamored by him. And like I said, I went through one content after the next. I was watching him get into debates. I was watching, in one case, he ends up on a channel battling a capitalist. And the capitalist invited him on the show and then brought an asshole of a friend with him on the show and just relentlessly attacked him as if they were in some dominant position. Unruhe decimated them in this. He decimated him. Now, I watched this and I thought, God, they're being massively unfair to him. And I, again, listened to a bunch of his other content. I don't necessarily have to agree with him. I was more fascinated that the subculture existed. And I don't say that as pejorative. Whether you're into karate, whether you're into chess, whether you're into politics, all of these things are called subcultures. Each of these cultures are just bumping off one another with perspectives from one of the other cultures. So I don't say that as pejorative. I say that knowing that I myself is to some degree into some subculture of something else. I'm probably into a lot of them. I did not know that people like this existed. And I don't say it again as a negative. I just mean there is a group that has a certain ideology and qualms and annoyances and arguments. Like, it was fascinating to me. I sat there and binge watched this for hours, utterly fascinated by what I was watching. That being said, so I just wanted to make the point that this is not a hit piece or anything else. I'm just making the point that Jason Unruhe gets his facts wrong here. He gets his facts wrong, and I kind of want to talk about what he says. So let's take a look at this. This is Jason Unruhe grabbing a knife out of a cellar and sticking it into Ocasio, not realizing it was one of those toy knives that you can get out of a junk shop. Let's see.
Now, Ocasio-Cortez has been elected to office, and a lot of leftists and liberals everywhere are screaming about what a great thing this is and how the system's suddenly going to change. Of course, now we have to go through this all over again. We had to go through this when Obama was elected. We had to go through this with Bernie Sanders. We had to go through this with Kshama Sawant. Every time it is that you think you voted a socialist in, you didn't. Now, I think it's really important that we have to go over this again because First Worldists just don't get it. They just keep supporting.
That term. I didn't know what that meant. So, First Worlders. I was like, what does that mean? What do you mean, First Worlders? And he would use this term like Third Worlders. This, from my understanding of this, again, outside of the culture, looking in, peering, it has to do with people who were in these various countries. So somewhere like the United States or Britain, countries that are in these kind of capitalistic modes. I'm gonna let him make his point. That's all. I'm just at that point, but I'm gonna let him make his point. I'm not gonna intrude.
Supporting social democracy instead of revolution. But Jason, you say, she says that she's a socialist. Actually, her exact words were, "I'm not a socialist, I'm a democratic socialist." Which means she's actually a social democrat. She's a Bernie-crat. She's a Western European style social democracy politician. She's not a socialist at all. This thing, democratic socialist, doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. They're just social democrats. They are still pro-capitalist. They still maintain the capitalist system, but they give the nice free stuff. They give the free education, the free healthcare, so that way First Worldists won't go into revolution. They give all the concessions.
Here's the thing, and this is why I'm fascinated by this. His knowledge of this stuff, he is so into this. Like, and I don't say it as a negative, I just mean he is ensconced in this. Like, his perspective of the world is purely in this. And again, what he's saying is not necessarily wrong. This is weird because usually I don't have to deal with stuff hitting me from my left. Usually I'm always dealing with stuff hitting me on the other side. And so this argument is cut in an odd and interesting way for me. What he's saying is not necessarily wrong. So ultimately, she is a democratic socialist, but that is a thing anymore. Just like socialist is a thing or communist is a thing. Democratic socialist is just as real as any of those other ones. All of these things are to some degree contrived, and these are isms that people use in order to create their modes of the world. I'm just making a point that if one is real, the other is real. Just the same like as anarchist is real or whatever. Social libertarian. Socialist libertarian. I'm just saying all of these things are just modes of thought in regards to how people should organize themselves in a somewhat of a logical way that is sustainable, that allows society to persist in a fair and equitable way. These are different ideas on it. It's a thing, just like the other things. It's a thing. Even if you want to call it a social democrat, fair enough. What he's saying is not wrong. Like this kind of Fukuyama idea that we're at the end of history. That for the most part you have capitalism with a few social programs, and that's the best that you can end up with. The idea here, though, is that these social programs are the things that prevent people from actually taking the reins themselves. Meaning, if things were so bad, where you get to that inflection point where it's so bad to exist, or existing, just very existence, is more horrendous than actually doing something, then you have a revolution. Now, the catch to that is, one of those things that staves that off is life being bearable. It is more of a pain in the ass to try to change and pull the reins than it is to just exist in the way things are. His point is not necessarily wrong. I mean, think of FDR. His greatest thing was saving capitalism. And you can even go back to Teddy Roosevelt, where Teddy Roosevelt is having, I forget who he was arguing with, but making this point that, do you understand that if wealth inequality remains, that people are going to come and get what we have? I'm paraphrasing, but that type of argument. That was a Republican making that type of argument. He's not wrong. The saving of capitalism in this thing of, look, we need to give back some of this, or these people are going to take it. Not us giving it, they're going to take what we got. You have these socialists, you have these unionists, you have these communists, and all of these people mean business. And if the world gets bad enough, if it gets bad enough. So again, he's not wrong. But social democrat is a thing. Let's not pretend it's not a thing. Let's let him keep going. I just wanted to intrude.
None of the revolution, and which is why people like this are so popular in the United States among leftists, because of the near absence of revolutionary potential. Now, once again,
it's not that it's, oh, Jesus Christ. There's a balance. I understand this thing of revolutionary potential. Explain to me what that looks like in real world terms. What does that look like? What is the hellscape that you're going to inflict on the public in order to get this kind of revolutionary potential? I understand that at the point where X number of people have died and everything else, and you may get this revolutionary potential going in the direction that you want, you may get it to go in a more authoritarian way. I'm just saying, revolutions are not necessarily those things that you can predict the outcome. What happens on day 2? What happens on day 2? What does this look like? I understand the revolutionary potential thing, but is it possible, to any degree that's possible, to move the country in a particular direction without necessarily trying to get there all at once? This is my only, it's not that I disagree with him from his context. He's right from his context, but I don't live in his context. And so when I look at this disposition, I look at this disposition as, you want to get to the end all at once, and what is the chaos that you're going to take in order to do that? I think there are other ways to reach that goal. Let's keep going.
This is show me where in her platform she said she was going to abolish private ownership of the means of production. Well, I'll help you out. It's not there because she is not a socialist. Cortez, at best.
She never claimed to be. She said she was a democratic socialist. She never claimed to be a socialist. Just saying. Let's keep going.
Is a left-wing progressive liberal. She is not a socialist. There is not socialism coming to America. And we've seen the news reports how, a Merriam-Webster dictionary was talking about how this has now become our most number one search term, socialist.
Well, look, I was just told by Alex Jones, InfoWars, that she was a communist. That's what I was told. Alex Jones told me that. And if Alex Jones told me that, that shit has to be absolutely flat fact true. But let's keep going. Would the communists know, or would Alex Jones know? Let's keep going. Flip it. Come on.
Now, unfortunately, people are really buying this. They really believe that this time it's going to be different. Remember, it's It's not like Obama. It's not like Bernie Sanders. It's not like Ashama Somwa. It's not like Occupy Wall Street. This time, it's totally going to be different, and there's going to be a socialist in power that's going to make real change. Now, one of the things that third worlders like myself like to harp on is the lack of any real war resistance.
Wait, that's not fair. I mean, look, it's one thing if the person was the president of the United States. You use Barack Obama, you use Bernie Sanders. Now, I understand you using them two because at least those two at least ran for the presidency. She's running for House of Representatives. What do you expect her to do by herself? Come on, dog. Come on. This is an unfair standard. I think that the only thing you can really hold her to is she going to push for the stuff that she said she was going to stand for? That's all you can judge her by. Her district in the United States. We have been propagandized to such an insane degree that any idea of socialism in anything was deemed bad, and communism, and those two things were inflated. And for the most part, if you were backing that, you were essentially backing Joseph Stalin, and you were a goddamn murderer. Like, you must understand the connections that were made from the standpoint of socialism in this country. The idea that within the course of a political term, not only has the term lost its hitting potential, but it's to some degree something that people have started to wear. I mean, Bernie Sanders has called himself a democratic socialist. She calls herself a democratic socialist. You have DSAs who've been running and winning. You have the guy who ran and won in Virginia. I can't think of his name. Lee Carter. I guess I'm making a point to you that things... This is not me harping on incrementalism, because I don't think this is incremental. This is a shift. It's a good shift. It's a good shift. Yeah, let's keep going. I think this is somewhat of an unfair standard to use Bernie Sanders, Barack Obama, both of which have ran for the presidency, and she's a 28-year-old running for the House of Representatives, and you're acting like the woman is somehow saying she's going to change the world. She's going to change her decision space. I can't, that's all you can ask for. Now, if you're making this secondary question of nothing changes, yeah, under status quo, nothing changes. If you just put in a bunch of corporate hacks, you're going to get what you want, and she's going to be drowned out, and she's going to be marginalized. Yes, that's true. Let's keep going. But you can't, I guess what I'm saying is you can't criticize her, A, for something she hasn't done, and B, for something that's beyond her scope. So let's keep going.
Now, let's take a look at her war record. Now, before she was elected, this was a major part of her campaign. We're going to be against the wars. We're going to stop the wars, or whatever specifically she might have said. However, now, after having been elected, all of a sudden, the anti-war stuff just completely disappeared from her platform.
Yeah, that's not true, buddy. So, this took place on the day of the election, because a lot of us lefties were like, whoa, what the fuck? You just got elected. How did you get that off of your website already? You just got elected. Did you let us down that quick? A bunch of cynical, a bunch of cynical lefties who's looking at this on a hair trigger. We are watching. This came up within literally almost immediately after she was elected. I was overjoyed to see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I can't say her name. I've been practicing my Scottish R's. This is a power grab. I was overjoyed to see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez defeat a corporate Democrat, but it was disappointing to learn that her uncontroversial anti-war stance on the United States foreign policy was removed from her website. Check these screenshots out. And I checked it out myself. This was there at one point. If you notice the part where it says, where is it? Peace economy. Since the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the United States has entangled itself in war and occupation throughout the Middle East and North Africa. As of 2018, we are currently involved in military action in Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Pakistan, Somalia. According to the Constitution, the right to declare war belongs to the legislative body, not the president. Yet most of these acts of aggression have never once been voted on by Congress. Alex believes that we must end the forever war by bringing our troops home and ending the airstrikes and bombings that perpetuate the cycle of terrorism and occupation throughout the world. That was on her site. And looked at it and says yes, because she's connecting this idea of what we do around the globe from the military standpoint to this kind of money that we're dumping into those things. Meaning it's a jobs program. I mean, ultimately, the money that, this porking these military bases and everything else. How do you get a congressman to cut the military budget if cutting that military budget is somehow going to defund a base that's in his particular district, or defund some kind of company that's getting money from some kind of particular weapons contract from the military? How do you do that? It is against their vested interest to do so. The bombs, the bullets, the planes, those military apparatuses that we make that go and kill and murder and maim and blow to pieces, those are jobs. Every bomb that's used, every person that's killed, that's a job that's created or a job that's saved. That's a pretty grim way to look at it, but it is a true way to look at it. Is it possible we can have an economy that's not based on death? Just a thought. So she responded to this. Her response: hey, looking into this, nothing malicious. Site is supporter run, so things happen. We'll get to the bottom of it. And it was still on her flyer. Meaning, so even if it wasn't necessarily on the website, the flyer hadn't changed and the flyer was out the day of the election. Just saying. Just saying. Let's let him finish. But I wanted to put a knife in that, and I wanted to put a knife in that soon, because I don't want that to get out that she's changed her anti-war stance immediately after getting elected. I don't know why she would change the anti-war stance. I think that would be overt, and I think you would have a lot of people who would be dramatically pissed off, and she would lose support almost immediately from that faction of the left who would be already disillusioned by this process. I would say look at what took place to Ro Khanna after he supported Crowley. You have a lot of people invested in her. People who didn't even live in New York investing in her. So I have a hard time believing that this is something that's taken place. And I tend to believe her that, yes, this is probably just an issue by somebody running her website, not a policy change. So let's let him finish. The video is not much longer. Well, actually, it is longer, but let's let him finish.
Is this a coincidence? No. This is the faux progressivism. This is the...
Yes, it is a coincidence. But let's keep going.
Concession to the first world working class that ends up destroying revolutionary potential. This is the bribe to keep them from going into revolution. And because first world people generally, there are very small pockets of exceptions.
God, man, he sounds like me in a weird way. Where, I made this argument that it's a bribe. Like, you have all of these levels of income distribution, but the money, for the most part, funnels all the way to the top. But the meager amount that comes down essentially allows those people to buy into the system the way the system is. In which case, it's a bribe. You could look at it from the perspective of it's a bribe. I agree with him. But again, what is the hellscape that you're talking about, and what does that world look like? And is it's Howard Zinn makes this awesome argument where Howard Zinn kind of talked about this thing of the Revolutionary War. He calls them the good wars, the three good wars, and how no one questions these wars. And I realized he's right. Nobody ever questioned those wars. He's right. Was it possible for the United States to get from under the thumb of Britain, aside from a bloody, bloody war? And you said, well, Canada did it, Australia did it, these other countries did it. Are you saying that the only way we could do it was through a bloody war? I guess I feel the same way with this. From his standpoint, he looks at this stuff as revolutionary potential of this thing of throwing off the shackles. But it seems that part of that is taking advantage of a situation where things get so bad with the working class, again, using that revolutionary potential of the angst and pain that's built up over mistreatment and malnourishment, and throw back and fight back against the plutocratic class. I want that too, but I don't want necessarily done, with muskets and pistols. I would rather do that with a political context. And by the way, I even think it's possible to do it with a political context. The problem is the left usually sits around with his thumb in his ass and doesn't recognize this for what it is. A war. It's an existential war. The left just takes its eye off the ball. The right, or you can say the plutocratic class, the oligarchical class, they don't. They want more. They're incentivized fiscally, financially to get more. And it's in fact easier for them to do this because they can just pay. They don't have to necessarily use the labor and the manpower to organize it. They have cash on their side. It's more work for us to do this. And also we have this thing of us being organized as like herding cats. So I can't disagree with him as an absolute. I disagree with him from the standpoint, I guess maybe of strategy, of from point A to point B. And I know he'll disagree with me too on this, saying that, what social democracy has ever turned into this kind of capitalist or socialist society. So fair enough. Let's keep going.
Do not actually want a revolution, even though many of them actually talk about it, yet never actually do it, and have shown nothing but a historical pattern of not doing it.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Explain to me what that means. Give me the nuts and bolts. Don't use words like this. What does revolution mean in this way? Is somebody shooting cops? Am I shooting my neighbor? What does that mean? Am I dragging Paul Ryan out of Congress? Explain to me, in nuts and bolts terms, what does it mean? I'm just trying to understand. Is it a political revolution or just an actual revolution?
This is why people like her exist. This is why people like her get into power, so that nothing ever actually changes. At best, the United States could possibly catch up to Western Europe.
I'll take it. I'll take it. I'm not fucking picky. I'll take it. Let my grandsons fight that battle to try to push it further. I'll take it. Do you know the hellscape where we're living in? Do you know? I just for personal information. And not for myself. I even used to call it the guy that called in. If you're young and you're trying to, let's say you have some kind of medical issue, you may get Medicaid, Medicare, you might get Social Security. Now, because of your age, you may want to work. However, you're in somewhat of a donut hole in the way that Social Security and the government goes about this. So, the amount that you make is going to be either deducted from the amount you get from Social Security, or they take the Social Security entirely. Now, sometimes, however, Social Security fucks up. And what they would do is they would say, hey, we fucked up. You owe us $10,000. What do you mean you owe us $10,000? Well, we got our record wrong. Sorry. This is the same government that spends $1 trillion on the military that has lost $5 trillion in 2015. And the guy that called in, Social Security was charging him like $6,000. Think about that. These are people who are just trying to live. And the government is cramping down on them in this way. Now, this doesn't even get into healthcare stuff. Imagine for the moment you're a single parent. And yes, you got Obamacare, but your rates has gone up 50%. You're making maybe $12 an hour trying to raise a kid. And that kid has some kind of illness. I'll take Western Europe. I'll take it. You're acting like there's real trauma. I guess that's the thing that's always missing in these type of conversations. There is real and actual trauma that people endure on a daily basis in this particular system. Her functioningness, you may say in the larger sense, in this kind of meta-narrative way, as an actor in a play, yes, may be to tamp down on the excesses of the capitalistic system. But that's a good thing. I would agree with you that from the standpoint of the left, from the standpoint of revolution, should be looking at all of this, the political space, as a war. And it should be looking at one particular thing after the next, taking one plank after the next, trying to find one way to push the debate and push the conversation and move it with this brain center of sorts that acknowledges the whole field as somewhat of a war. We don't have that. Now, if that's what you mean by political revolution, fair enough, I agree. But those things are not necessarily separate and distinct from one another. It's moving the conversation. And for evidence of this, I'll give you the right wing. Look at what this country looked like after the Great Depression, FDR. And immediately after FDR, they slowly chipped away. And to the point where you got a country that literally has moved so far to the right that the idea of New Deal politics, they have to call themselves socialists. Why do you think half of the country doesn't vote? I don't think the country has necessarily moved to the right with the Democratic Party. I think the Democratic Party has just left a lot of those people, and those people became independents. I think you have a lot of other people who are completely disillusioned by the process and maybe either just started voting Republican because they thought Democrats were liars, or, for the most part, just pulled themselves out of the political space. The point I'm trying to make here is this ability to move the dial in a particular direction is possible. We are living in it. We're living in it. What we were in 50s is fundamentally different than what we are now. Even from the standpoint of what Ronald Reagan was. Ronald Reagan couldn't even get elected in the Republican field. Ronald Reagan is probably close to Obama. He's probably close to Obama. And it's funny, and I know people who live through that space are like, that seems shocking, but think about it. Obama himself has admitted, yeah, back then I would be a liberal Republican. He'd be a liberal Republican. I'm making a point to you that in the same way that the dial has moved to the right, assiduously moved to the right, that's evidence that the dial can move. And in the same way that the dial moved in the term of FDR, again, that is evidence that the dial can move. Now, your argument would be these things are just preventing a revolution. Like these are bribes that essentially allow the system to remain the way the system is. And I would agree with you. I would agree. But the question becomes, is there a way to continue to move the ball? And that may take a little bit more work. That may take a little bit more strategy. But it's for a speculative revolution where it's hard to know how it ends up. Depends on what you're being by revolution, I guess. So, I'm going to put this video at the bottom. Again, the wild part about this is I find myself agreeing with a lot of it. And even have used the language that he's using. I guess the difference between these things are, I see value in the political discourse and the political edifice. And I am not convinced that given due diligence to trying to actually get shit accomplished and using it in the way that it should be used, that you can't move the ball. I don't know what the revolution looks like. So, oh wow, we have people here. Funny you mentioned paying to get out. Wealthy colonialists paid poor colonialists to go to war for them. Colonialist army was made of poor drunks. Yeah, that's amazing, right? If you were rich, you could pay what, like $280 to get out of the war or something. It's amazing. Check out Streamlabs. Gives you the ability to PayPal donations and customize alerts without missing any. You can also customize layouts with OBS. Streamlabs. Balthazar, I might check that out. You are a wealth of information today, my man. Joshua Renshaw, what history has taught us is that you can only fuck with people for so long until they eventually pick up their pitchforks. Do we want a revolution that is... I can't see it. Why can't I see it? Do we want a revolution that is politically, economic, or bloody in what remains in the wake of this? Right. And I think that's my issue here. The term revolution, I don't know what it means. I do know from the standpoint of if you are... I don't know what it means. job guarantee for private jobs. Yeah, that's what's his name? He wants to do that to Bitha. That's Ro Khanna's idea. That's Ro Khanna's idea. I don't like that idea. I do not like that idea. Worker co-ops are a good start. People can start to work right now. Andrew, yeah. I agree with that. Worker co-ops is an awesome idea as a middle ground between those things. Meaning, federal jobs guarantee, no, we're not giving money to private companies. Fail. Absolute fail. But federal jobs guarantee and worker co-ops. Like with a bias towards worker co-ops. This is kind of what I mean. If the left gets in office, the left needs to think about this stuff as from a strategic standpoint. It can't just be, I just want to get health care. It has to be, there's a grand narrative from the standpoint of what they're trying to accomplish. Just like the right, I believe, have a grand narrative in what they try to accomplish. Baltazar, when you get the chance, you should totally do a video on MMT. It is very interesting. Take on money, post gold standard, and production capacity limits. Baltazar, I've had the guy from Real Progressives on MMT on the show multiple times. I've even had Firestone on like 3 times. I think him and I had an interview for like 3 hours. I've had a few people on from Real Progressives. Yeah, we've done it. Give us $5,000 and ensure safety net is not touched. Ensure the safety net is not touched. Baltazar, do egg co-ops just become worker co-ops? I don't know what egg co-ops are. Oh, you're being funny. You're being funny. Joshua Rich, use that absolute power in order to enrich themselves because they have 1, greed, and 2, opportunity to take advantage and feed their greed. Yes. MMT is what we have now. How's that working for you? Tabitha Enriquez. Well, yeah, because you're spending like $1 trillion on the military budget, not to mention the black budget where you have trillions of dollars that are being bled away. That's MMT. That's literally MMT. The Jack HQ, subsidize private workers instead of corporations. But isn't that the same? Oh, I see what you mean. So, here's the thing. If a person is doing, let's say, videos, or let's say Uber or Lyft, or the person is doing some kind of gig thing, would it be okay for the federal government to assist in what their wage, subsidize their wages to some degree? I mean, after all, at that point, you are subsidizing private workers. I would be okay with that. I don't want that money just being dumped into corporations, though. That's a fail for me. How about no war and healthcare? Alan 210, Joshua Renshaw, the opposite is true. Communism worked to raise hundreds of millions out of poverty and desperation. Study history, not just your bullshit bourgeois sources. Ooh. Now here's the thing. Both can be true. So, the Soviet Union, yeah, alright, so both can be true. The Soviet Union, World War I was decimated. Millions of people died. Civil War, massive, brutal, bloody civil war. And by World War II, they had built up their forces to some degree to another military force. The German army smashed that military force to smithereens to the tune of, like 4 or 5 million died just in the first opening rush. And that's not including civilians. That number gets much higher. They were able to accumulate another army to themselves, in which case they were able to push back and break the back of the German war machine once Germany was started to run out of fuel and they couldn't keep going in the way that they were going. What is this war of movement? That war of movement came to a stop and started going in the reverse. They lost like 20 million people in that war. So you've had 2 devastating wars. You've had a civil war. And within the course of a few years, they were up to the point of being a superpower just behind the United States. Like, that's an amazing achievement. Whatever you want to say about the brutal means that Stalin did, that's an amazing achievement. Give him credit where credit is due. Now, the problem with this is a lot of people died. A lot of people died to make that work. Here's the other thing, though. People always forget the fact that from the standpoint of USSR, or Soviet Union, they were in an existential struggle by capitalistic forces that wanted to strangle them. So your country is not necessarily a country that develops in normal means. Your country develops in this kind of weird militaristic way because all of these forces are trying to take you out. But that being said, I don't necessarily think Stalin is always the end result of communism. I think that's just kind of thing that put capitalists putting stuff on it. Those capitalists never own up to the fact of murdering all those Native Americans for genocide. If you're going to say that Stalin was a communist and ergo all of these deaths are attributable to communism, then you have to say the same thing for capitalism. They never like to say that. But whatever, I'm going on a tangent. I guess my point is, you can say both things are true. It was a brutal, vicious way in which Stalin went about dragging his country out of this kind of poverty. By the same token, he did drag his country out of poverty. So, let's see. China is more capitalistic than communist. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I know people like to say that China is a communistic country. Whatever. China is doing capitalism better than the capitalist countries are doing capitalism. And what's wild about it, you know, when Obama was doing the TPP, all of that stuff was the pivot against China. All of it was the pivot against China. That Asian pivot and all this other stuff. They were trying to find a way to head off this kind of what they consider to be a Chinese dominance in goods and so forth. Yeah, China is kicking ass in a capitalistic way. And why wouldn't they? I mean, think about it. Ultimately, capitalists like to get items for cheaper. And if you can get those items for cheaper, either through hitting labor or controlling the cost of the production, why wouldn't you do it? Now, the Chinese government, in their case, they get to control all that stuff. So you don't have to deal with these little capitalistic actors. They can just say, well, look, we just have state capitalism. Fuck it, why not? And then the Western countries are like, whoa, your brand of capitalism is, you know, fucking with our zen. Science and technology can be probably much more, yes, much better and faster under socialism. It depends on what you mean by socialism. So let me explain what I mean. I would agree with you. I just don't like the ideologies, man. I hate the isms. Like, if we had a conversation, we say, how do we ensure that we have a stable environment, a sustainable environment, and focus ourselves on human beings and not profits? Can we start there? Now, I know you say, well, the socialistic doctrine, I get that. But just as human beings, can we make a choice from there? If you're saying that people have to give up their choice in order to be under a socialist system, then I disagree. That's why the whole democratic socialist thing comes into play. And here's the other thing. Like, Ocasio-Cortez can't go out there saying she's gonna confiscate UPS. God, I can't think of the name of the word. But she's essentially going to oh, Jesus Christ, the word slipped from me. It's going to come to me later. But essentially, she's going to make UPS a public company, essentially, and take the post office or take the UPS or take some other company. I don't think she can go out there and say that. She would sound like a raving lunatic. And Nancy Pelosi is already in these kind of at her wits, fighting back against Republicans, saying that the Democratic Party has become a socialist haven. There are limits in the political discourse, and at least I think they are. I think I have this image in my head of what the American public can take and what they can't take. The arguments that you can make versus the arguments that you can't make. Meaning, part of, like, for example, UFOs. When Hillary Clinton came out and she wanted people to ask her the question about UFOs, like in the WikiLeaks documents, I don't know how many people read these, but it's shown in multiple occasions where the people in her camp wanted people like Jimmy Kimmel or some of these other talk show hosts to bring up UFOs. They wanted them to bring it up. Kimmel, if I'm not mistaken, brings it up and asks her the question, and she says, it's not UFOs, it's UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. The reason she did that is because in people's head, there's certain associations with UFOs that she doesn't want to have to deal with. So the changing of the name is, in a sense, this changing of the cognitive connections associated with the word. Same thing here. In running in the political discourse, you're going to have to deal with people who have certain ideas in their heads about the things that you're saying. And if those ideas may not necessarily line up with the way that you think of that stuff, or at the very least, how they're cognitively mapped, triggers some kind of alarm in them, those conversations need to be talked about in a particular way. So, yeah. This push, I think his push on her is somewhat unfair. But fair enough. Was Yugoslavia a socialist or communist country? Well, it depends. Was it Yugoslavia? No, I'm thinking of the Ukraine. The Ukraine was trying to be an anarchist country during the Russian Revolution. That's not funny, but they made a deal with the Bolsheviks, which the Bolsheviks essentially reneged on once they consolidated military power and essentially wiped them out. I never understood why there was this kind of feud between anarchists and Bolsheviks until I stepped upon that history. Honestly, don't ever think worker co-ops can't control the capitalist monster. Still have to compete against capitalists. To beat Enriquez, I asked Richard Wolff that. I essentially said, look, worker co-ops are essentially just little democracies battling totalitarian states. That's not really getting rid of capitalism. Ultimately, you're just creating worker co-ops that still have to abide by the certain rules of the capitalistic system, even though within itself, it may be a democratic system. Yes. I mean, there's no way you can disagree with that. Yes. With one difference. Worker co-ops allows people themselves to own the means of production. It is a hard argument to make to tell somebody, look, I want you to have more agency in your job. I want you to make more money. And we don't need the CEOs in these companies. You can do it yourself. I want to make that argument. I want people to be able to make that argument. Because I want the Republican to explain what's wrong with that argument. The government can assist in worker co-ops. We can even put a backstop and say if a company is going to fail, if a company wants to leave, the company has at the very least give the employees the option of buying first. There's certain things that we in the government itself, the collective of us, can do to make this more profitable and more fair. And the beauty of this is it's like a virus that eats the host. This host being the capitalistic system. Because think about it. I mean, ultimately, the problem, or part of the problem that we have is the distribution of resources is magnificently uneven. You have one small sliver of the population taking the majority of the resources and the majority of the cash and the loot. That's a problem, and that's just stupid that the majority has been conned into allowing this. Whatever the con is, it makes no sense if you think about it. What happens when you eliminate the CEOs, the elites? The workers say, we don't need you. You can be dismissed. We can handle our own affairs. Well, right off the bat, that guy is no longer making $20 million. In one company after the next, you don't have people at the top making $20 million, while at the same token have other people in the company making more money. This doesn't solve your issues, per se. Meaning the capitalistic system is still a problem. Those companies, even being democracies, still have an impetus to do bad things. They just have an impetus to pay themselves more as employees and not ship their jobs overseas. But let's be honest, it's still a problem. I'd argue for a maximum lowest paid to highest paid ratio, then for a minimum wage too. Yeah, Balthazar. I guess my point is there are things that can be done to try to mitigate some of the issues that we find in the system. I suspect Jason will say those things are band-aids on a system that functions in a way that is antithetical to what you're trying to do. And I got to be honest, I would agree with him. I don't think these things would inevitably work. I think from the standpoint of the left, worker co-op is not an end goal. Worker co-op is one plank of a larger plan, if that makes sense. Like, when Republicans go after what they want politically, they take planks out. It's not we're just going to get rid of this in one swoop. We weaken it, we attack it. So if unions are going to support the Democratic Party, then we're going to attack unions. We're going to attack them with right to work laws. We're going to attack them with grassroots propaganda campaigns against those particular systems. We are going to go after them in one state after the next. We're going to pay politicians that are absolutely against them. We're going to spread our forces out, and we're going to attack the planks of the party. We're going to attack laws that allow voting, meaning for gerrymandering. We're going to attack laws that would allow Voter Rights Act. We're going to do whatever we need to do that would allow us to get more power at the expense of others. Because the goal in this is to win. The goal in this is not to play fair. The goal in this is not to be moral or play tiddlywinks. The goal is to win. That's the only goal. There's no right and wrong. There's no morality. The goal is to win. That's the way they see it. And I suspect we should see it the same. I also suspect we should see it from the standpoint of that this is a larger, broader, existential conflict. And ultimately, our end goal is to put a knife in the heart of the way this system currently operates. And I don't think you do that screaming at the top of your lungs with your hair on fire that we're trying to take out capitalism. I do think you take out one plank at a time, letting the public normalize to that particular plank being taken out. What I would guarantee you is at a certain point, the public will look at any society that they're in as being normal if they were brought up in that particular society. As insane as our society is with people sleeping on the street, we consider that to be utterly normal. Why is it normal that people are living on the streets? It's fucking weird. Andrew, a host of reforms to eliminate rent-seeking from our economic system is a way to directly attack capitalism. Yes. To be Enriquez, our liberal system puts the merchant class in place of the aristocracy. I don't even see a difference between those things, to be Enriquez. I think those things are exactly the same. Right to work laws were passed in apartheid South Africa to keep workers to fight amongst each other. Very sad, and Tim Kaine should be ashamed of his administration for those laws. Masdingo. Society does not benefit when a few people are holding on to $100 billion and don't need the... Think about how crazy that is. Like, they've stored up $100 billion of resources in one guy's account, and there are other people sleeping on the street, and the society looks at this and says, fair game. Fair game. Is it possible that Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos could have done all that he's done with Amazon and got away with maybe $20 billion as opposed to $140 billion? Would he have been materially harmed by having, let's say, $100 billion less, leaving him with the paltry sum of $20 billion? I'm making the point that this is nonsense, and these people get these ungodly sums of money like this, where you have other people sleeping on the street. This is fucking nonsense. I understand this thing of migrants having their kids ripped away from them. My heart goes out to them. But my heart goes out to the person who can't afford their medical bills or is suffering in a job that they absolutely hate, or is supporting a parent nearly losing their job in the process of doing so. Or for that matter, sleeping on the street, not being able to feed themselves, not being able to get drugs for their kids, making the choice between drugs and food. These are not decisions that people should have to make. Fucking richest country on the planet. This shit, man. He'd go 10 billion. I guess I'm making the point that the incentive structure that we've set up is greatly out of proportion to what the person is doing. There is nothing on this planet that Jeff Bezos has done to equal up to $140 billion. Let's be honest. Amazon is nice. It is not worth $140 billion, and I'm pretty sure for $50 billion he would have done the exact same thing. We are massively out of whack in our value system. Massively out of whack. The fact that we have all of these people on drugs, the fact that all of these people are out there with these mass shootings, this is evidence of a sick society. Those people weren't born that way. You think the person who's taking those pills are just taking those pills for shits and giggles, or are they doing it because their life is utterly devoid and painful in the way that our society has arranged itself? The pressure that we consistently put on people, and we're shocked to shit when those people flip out. I mean, come on, let's be honest. And that's another thing. We never interrogate the reasons. We always go to the end result as if the end result allows some sort of solution. So, it's not why are these people taking pain pills to this degree and dying from the pills that they're taking. It's we need to go after the doctors or the drug companies. I understand that you want to believe that the drug companies are at fault because the drug companies were selling these things, and fair enough. But again, you have to kind of ask this question, but why were the people susceptible to it in the first place? Even the killings. Nobody ever asked, why are these people doing this? Why are they flipping out? We treat people as if people are individual, distinct things. They're not. They're cogs in a wheel. They're machines. There's an aspect of us that is us, fair enough. But that aspect of us is always bumping up against society. How we were raised, culture, implicit and explicit, and the things that we learned. We soak in our society. There's no way for you to look at a person and say that particular individual is somehow separate and distinct from the society to which that individual was in. Because guess what? That person could have never become that person without being enmeshed in your society. We never put the society on trial. We always put the individual on trial as if those things are separate. They're not. They're not. It's one thing if you get one shooter a year. It's a fluke, fair enough. It's another thing. I think we're 190th at this point. This is evidence of a sick society. Why is a communist attacking a democratic socialist for not being a real socialist? Yeah, right. Ken the Media, I love that. Why is a communist attacking a socialist for not being a real socialist? Oh, I love that. I love that. There are no individual solutions to systemic problems, Andrew. Yeah, and what they end up with is we need more jails. We need more jails. We need to put more people in prison and cages. That's what we need. That's totally going to fix it. 5% of the world's population, 25% of the prison population in our jails. Think about that. That's literally a prison state. We have gulags. It's amazing. Love your take on that, Jamal. You are yet again spot on in my estimation. Masting. Thank you. Joshua Wrench, Michelle Porcher. The wealth of Bezos and Gates is mostly in shares, right? And something like 90% of the shares are owned by financial institutions. So it's not the traditional form of wealth. It's something like a big vote of confidence and claim on profits by financial oligarchs. I see what you mean. Essentially, it's not liquid. It's shares that can be activated if they need to. But they can always sell the shares. I mean, the whole point of saying these shares are worth $50 billion or $80 billion. They're worth that much. If Bill Gates needed to liquidate those shares, or Jeff Bezos, he can liquidate those shares. All right, let me make sure I haven't missed anybody because I was ranting. Subsidized, right, Baltazar. The United States is more communist than we like to admit. Russia, China are more capitalist. If you like the content of this video, like communists, and subscribe. It's funny. It's like, we don't like communist governments because there's like a few people in charge of everybody else. But you're in a capitalistic system where 95% of the resources went to the top 1%. How is that? How is that not the same? Or at the very least, how is that not very similar? You have a small section of the population that controls, or it gets, a large, overwhelming segment of the spoils. And they make the determination on what to do with those spoils. Meaning how they search for gas, how they contaminate the air if they're doing something else, how they figure out power, whether it's old, coal, or nuclear, how they run the services. Those are not done by democratic decisions. Those are done purely by the will of a 1%. Similar to a communistic country where a small segment of people make the rules for everybody else. And to boot, instead of one party, we have two parties. We're fucking doing double time. The Jack HQ. Why can't I see these? Let's see. The Pentagon and Wall Street need to pay back our debt. You talking about that $21 trillion. Here's the thing. The Whistler, Jamal, that's not communism. I know it's not communism. I'm just making the comparison between the two things. I'm saying that in the same way in the communistic system, you had a small segment of people making the decisions for a large number of people. In the capitalistic system, you have a top 1% that essentially controls, for the most part, the resources, how those resources are used, and in the large case, the distribution of those resources. That's the only point I'm trying to make. Communism with a ruling elite ain't communism. Oh, I see what you mean. Fair enough. Let's say Stalinism. How about that? Let's say Stalinism. Fair enough. Or you could say socialism in the sense of, or authoritarian socialism, whatever you want to call it, but you know what I mean. I'm talking about the comparison to the Soviet Union. Stalin would make the point that, look, an argument can be made that socialism was this kind of holding pattern to get from point A to point B. In which case, what was taking place in the Soviet Union couldn't necessarily be called communism. I am not a historian on this point. I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to get into very detailed specifics in a similar way that maybe Jason Unruhe can probably break it down. So I'm not even going to try. I was just trying to make a point about this whole thing of how Americans, we're superior with our top 1% pretty much owning and ruling everything, but they're not with their top percentage running and ruling everything. Let's see if I missed anything else. All right, we've ran the show for an hour, and I got to be honest, I thought this show was going to last all of 10 minutes. So, and we have a ton of people commenting. Depending on Wall Street, need to pay back our money. Yeah, that was the last one. And I agree with you on that one. They're wasting our money. People need to be more angry about that. I mean, they're looting the treasury. With $21 trillion, we could have a hyperloop. All poverty eliminated. Gone. Think about that shit. All poverty eliminated. Anybody who wants to go to school can go to school. I'm trying to say what you could have spent for $21 trillion, what you could have gotten for that money, as opposed to getting just a bloated military budget with a fucked up infrastructure all throughout the country with nothing to show for the money. Bunch of dead Americans and dead Iraqis. That's all you got to show for it. Hyperloop from point A to point B. Healthcare. Education. Poverty eliminated. Federal jobs guarantee. Universal basic income. Essentially a Western social democracy with a bunch of high-tech shit to boot. Wasted our money. Absolutely wasted our money. We shouldn't need charities in this country. No, we shouldn't need charities in this country. CJO Joy, anarchism. Anarchism, I kind of agree with Chomsky on the anarchism thing where it just comes across as natural. I don't know how it works on larger scale items. For example, what does an anarchist society do with these refugees streaming into the country? How does those little camps deal with stuff like that? Like, I don't know enough about it to get into the details of how large-scale issues that require almost global coordination get handled in these kind of smaller enclaves or smaller communities. But I don't know enough about it. Millennials favor socialism. Millennials favor democratic socialism. They favor democratic socialism. Yes, at least the discussion is happening. Yes. The discussion is taking place. Which, honestly, I don't care. I love the fact that discussion is taking place. I just love the fact that the conversation is being had. Because the basis of that conversation is class. And that's the conversation I want to get to. That's the conversation I want to get to. So yes, I love the fact that the discussion is happening. I understand Jason Unruhe saying it's not enough. I think he's wrong. I think this is... Look, you're acclimatizing a public that has been whitewashed of a conversation for class for like 50 years. And you're bringing this conversation back into play and saying, hey, look, this is what your elders used to read, and this is what your elders used to talk about before there was an intervention from the standpoint of the Cold War. You got some reading to do, and you got to catch up. I like that. I like that they're interested, and I like that they want to know. And I like that at the basis of this conversation of class is in their heads. So I love it. It's been avoided for decades. Yes, it has, Tabitha. Yes, it has. We could not be talking like this 2 or 3 years ago, Mastingo. Yes. And think about this. I mean, I'm laughing at Alex Jones calling the woman a goddamn communist. I mean, but these are going to be some of the attacks that they're going to hit with. What we are going to see is whether or not these attacks work. We've been told that Bernie Sanders was going to be a withering daisy, that they're going to call him a socialist and a communist. He's going to fall apart. He's just going to absolutely fall apart like a dandelion. You just go, and it's just. That's what we're told. Well, we're going to see if that's true with Ocasio. We'll be able to see it in real time. So, do you think Star Trek would support democratic socialism? Joshua Renshaw. No, Star Trek is way beyond this stuff. Star Trek is into a Venus Project-esque, this kind of technological society where people have their needs met. They're cash. At a certain point, cash is non-existent in the Star Trek universe. If you notice in some of the movies or some of the shows, when they're in other planets, cash is not necessarily something they have because cash is not something that we use. The Federation was able to go past it. Democratic socialism at its basis is still capitalism. Star Trek universe is evolved beyond it. It's, post-scarcity. Yep. Value, what is it called? Resource-based economy. Resources are the things that make the determination on how we go about our affairs. You must understand, from a Star Trek universe standpoint, in the same way that you have people who are willing to die in the military today, who say, I'm going to either give my life or lose my life. I'm going to either take somebody else's life or lose my own life for some ideal of a country. Ultimately, really, it's not the country, it's just the government itself who's sending them there, especially in cases of wars of aggression. But in their heads, they have this idea that they want to have some level of service. The catch becomes the way that service is being used and manipulated to some degree, leveraged, not into ends that are great for the state and great for the society itself, but for destructive ends. Doesn't have to be that way. This is kind of my point when I say we can have all sorts of arrangements. Your society could be arranged in a way where people have somewhat of a work ethic because people have a work ethic. Same way people say, I want to be in the military because I want to serve my country. You can serve your country in other ways. And they could be more extensive ways. For example, you have the situation now where, for the most part, if you wanted to, you can supply your needs in a technological way. Why are you working past 40? Understand what I'm saying. Your society could say, look, for the first X number of years of life, let's say between 18 and 30 or maybe 40, you work, and after which you retire, and you get a stipend from the government for it. Meaning, I'm trying to make the point that your society could reorganize itself in a way where work is not the point, where life is the point. You could do that. We won't do that. The society doesn't have a concept of that. But it could. This stuff is choice. I mean, think about it for the moment. What is your life about? What is the point of your life? That point doesn't exist. You make that point whatever you want to make that point. And people have taken the point as if they were a cog in a wheel or some slave on a plantation. But in this case, instead of a slave, they're a worker. But nevertheless, still in a role in which they are subordinate and subservient to some other source. Money is a chain. It's a chain around our throats. It could be different. That's my only point. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. Life is the point. Yeah, life is the point. Roddenberry had a vision and a political ideology woven into it. Yes, he did. But the wild part about it is, if you notice, in Star Trek, the human perspective in this case is the rational human being. And let me explain. Rational from the standpoint of sustainable humanitarian concerns. Life matters more. Period. Yes, we may get into these fights and wars, but those things are the last resort. And at the end of the day, we're doing our best to live by a certain ideology. An argument can be made that Star Trek presents a painting of, it's not a military force, but we would look at it as military, but it's not military, through the lens of somebody who sees it in its kind of glorious terms. It's like if somebody was in the military and they described the military like, hey, the guy was in the military, so he would never lie. It's like, what? Why do you believe that? I've heard somebody tell me that. It's like, that's fucking insane. He's a person. Or that guy's integrity will be what? Because you believe that he has a badge on that he's somehow other integrity. No, he's just a person. It can be looked at through these lens, but I choose not to look at it through this lens. I choose to look at it through the lens of rational human beings. Life matters. Here's the thing. The moment that you find yourself growing up in a society, you take on the values of that society, whatever it is. If you were born in feudal Japan, you'd act like somebody who was born in feudal Japan as opposed to somebody born in Germany, or as opposed to somebody who's born a Nazi or a Zionist or whatever. I'm just making a point. You take on the attitudes of the culture that you're in. If you were born in a Star Trek culture, you would take on the attitudes and the societies of the culture and the morality and everything else of that particular culture. You may have a range of your morality, but that range is still going to be within certain human terms of that particular culture. I think I've strayed away from the point. I'm just trying to make the point. Star Trek is different in this regard. It's not, it takes a rational perspective from a humanitarian standpoint. If that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. But there are other perspectives, be it Klingon, Romulan, Andorian, Vulcan, and those perspectives are just as valid. If there is no God, there is no point. Meaning any particular perspective is just a relative perspective that depends on how it lines up with the reality and the way people judge that reality. The perspective of human beings is not necessarily better or worse than the perspective of the Klingons in this case. The only difference here is what you want to accomplish. Well, if you're in a Klingon, your culture is a little bit different. It's more violent, it's more rough, and everything else. But at the end of the day, it's not right or wrong. It's only right or wrong depending upon how you view those things. And again, even from that, you're just judging it by your own culture. We have the rational human culture from that perspective, and everything else is judged by that on the show. We do it unconsciously. But the Star Trek ethos of sorts gives you all of these sorts of moral quandaries that you end up with where you don't necessarily get a resolution to, because you don't get a resolution to those things in real life. It's fucking awesome episodes, man. I love it. Brent Spiner acting is absolutely Craigasm. Data is awesome in that thing, especially when he gets to the movies. It's fucking awesome. God damn it, you got me talking about Star Trek. Bastard. Who did that? Who did that? Hillary Cleon and Romulan Emmanuel are still trying to find their humanity. Hillary Cleon and Romulan Emmanuel. Oh, that's awesome. I love how any demonstral, regardless of what the discussion is about, you can just say, what about Star Trek? Insert subject here, and he makes the podcast go another 20 minutes. Who started this conversation about Star Trek? What rat bastard did that? That's hilarious. Who did that? Who did that? Joshua Renshaw. Oh, you bastard. You bastard. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Fair enough, fair enough. You got me, Josh. You got me. He's like, hey, you think Star Trek would be okay with democratic socialism? We're like, no, I don't think so, because of blah, 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 blah. And 20 minutes later, it's like, oh, fuck. Did we just have a conversation about democratic socialism, Star Trek, and how do we start this off? I was like, how do we go? How do we fall into this? I've done this at least a dozen times. I love talking about Star Trek. I literally can do a channel where the only thing for hours we just sit there and talk about Star Trek. I love it. Like, it's a fucking fascinating show. Like, I will be sitting there talking to my wife about it. Her eyes will glaze over at a certain point. And then I just get up and come to my channel and just do a show about Star Trek. If you remember, I used to do shows about Star Trek all the time. I love talking about it. I love it. Who decides who programs the computer making the resource allocation calculations? They say experts, which is guaranteed to be a small elite group. So I've had the Venus Project, Jack Fresco. I've had Meadows on the show, and I asked her that because I had the same question. My thing was, who chooses? And she says, well, it's not really a choice. It's a scientific consensus. Wait a minute, what do you mean scientific consensus? But even scientists have disagreements on this stuff. And I'm like, and I didn't understand the answer here, because this answer seems always a bit shady to me. Who chooses? Now, if you had a robot, and that robot says, here are the resources to all the regions of the world, and here's the allocation for everybody else to make sure this shit works fairly. Fair enough. Now, that's the programming of the robot, however. In which case, somebody may say, hey, dude, that goddamn robot is being programmed unfairly to give... Not saying it's easy. But, look, at some point, we have to come to some resolution of trust. The world can come together and say, look, we don't want to put missiles in space. Okay. If you can come together and say we don't want to put missiles in space, why can't you come together and say we don't want to have nuclear weapons? We don't want to have this. We don't want to have that. Meaning you can make those choices. And you make those choices based on this thing of trust. I trust them not to do this. If you trust me not to do this, we're not going to have to waste money on doing this. Great. We don't have to waste money on putting stuff in space. Well, that's gone. Trump, with Space Force, he's going to start a space race with Russia and China, who may already have technology in this regard. Look, the problem is trust. If I gave everything I had, but I could get all that I need, would that be a model for which people would go about their way? And the problem with this is people would say, well, you're going to have some lazy SOBs, and I don't want to bust my ass, and these other people aren't busting my ass, etc., etc., etc. The issue is trust. The issue is trust. However, that system needs to be arranged. It needs to be arranged in a way where, I don't know. I understand what Meadows says. Meadows makes this argument that you use scientific consensus to come to those things. These are not ideological decisions. So if it's how do you provide health care to everybody in a decent way, that's a technological and that's a scientific question, or that's a technical question. That's not an ideological question. Meaning it's not Obamacare, which is this kind of political answer. It's how do we actually do this, and how do we do this right? Those are different things. One is a technical question, in which case you have scientists and you have people who in the know try to work in order to arrive at an answer, talking to people who are in those fields and everything else. The other one is purely just an ideological decision done for political reasons. There's a difference in those things. I mean, fuck, Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and for example, 60 million people thought that was a good idea. But I suspect a lot of people thought that was a good idea because the person who was running against. There's a difference. Like I get angry at people sometimes, but I have to be honest to what they're dealing with. I don't know why I'm an oddball. I don't know why I popped my head up and looked around and said, whoa, I don't like this. Like, I don't know the thing that prodded that. What I do know is every day people get up, take a shower, maybe, wash, hopefully, maybe eat their Cheerios, kiss their wife, maybe have sex with their wife or husband or whoever, if they get a quickie before work, go to work, come back home, take a shower, maybe not, maybe have sex with their wife, maybe play their Xbox, maybe smoke a little pot, and go to sleep and rinse and repeat. And they consider that a life. Spending the majority of their day toiling away for somebody else's profit. They're told that there are two political parties. No point in looking elsewhere. There are two political parties. The Democrats and Republicans. They're told that the extent of political debate is whatever the Democrat is and whatever the Republican is. They're not just told that day in, day out. They're born into it. They're raised into it from the time they're kids to the time they become adults. That's what they are ensconced in. It's like being in Jell-O. Everywhere you look around, it's a little hazy and everything else, but for the most part, everybody is kind of in the same mode. I can't be mad at them when they're socialized and propagandized to in this kind of subtle and overwhelming way constantly. They don't know any better. And so it's like, if they don't know any better, can I be mad at him that some of them said, we need something else, and I don't like her? And a percentage decided to pull that lever for Trump. Not the percentage that are racist, not the percentage that are sexist, not the percentage that are just evil SOBs. I'm talking about just decent human beings. I think the majority of the people in this country are just decent human beings. It's the person they were running against. So, progressives need militias for community defense and community service like the Black Panthers. Progressives don't need internet communists like Unruhe. I don't dislike Unruhe. I told you I was fascinated by Unruhe. When he, some asshole invited him onto the show. And the guy who invited him onto the show had another asshole waiting on the show. The shady guy who invited him on the show, who come across as extremely shady and untrustworthy, right off the bat in the way that he's talking, because you can see that he did something that he had no business doing, and he was being mischievous in the process, and he was setting Unruhe up for essentially to be attacked. It was disgusting. They were disgusting human beings. I'm perfectly okay with them being hit by a flying toilet out of an airplane. I don't like stuff like that. It's a bullying tactic of sorts. And then this capitalist, this nasty capitalist, who's having this conversation with Unruhe, is talking to him as if he's in some superior position. At one point, like telling him to shut up and whatnot. It's like, who the fuck are you? Who the fuck are you? The only reason you would talk that way is if you believe that because this guy is in some minority, because this guy is a communist or socialist, that you are in some authority over him in this situation. Nothing could be further from the truth. They were within a model itself, and within that model, for whatever reason, in his demented head, he thought he was better. Fact is, both of them were idiots. They knew dick about dick. And Unruhe ran circles around them with the knowledge that he had in this particular understanding of this kind of Marxist or Maoist communist ideology. I was on his side after that because I hated what they did to him. I thought it was fucked up, and I thought it was unfair, and I thought he handled himself extremely well. Don't agree with him, though. Don't agree with him. Don't agree with him at all. Never heard of this bloke, Grant Jarvis. Yeah, I had never heard of him either. A gentleman, one of my subscribers sent me him, I think it was during a debate with Sargon. And I was like, whoa, what the hell is this? Shocked by it. Didn't know what to think of it. I think the same subscriber or one of my other subscribers said, hey, take a look at this video. He's going after Cortez. And as I listened to the video for Cortez, I was like, okay, I understand his point. I want to talk about it, but I disagree with him. Not to mention he gets it wrong. It's something that she debunked. They might not have known. Most people don't know shit about socialism and Marxism. Soviet winners prison, yeah. And they didn't. And he ate them alive. I watch Unruhe, but he is right. Imperator servat. The Romans thought, knowing this, they could design a system that wouldn't collapse through cycles that produce incredibly stagnant, corrupt system. Yeah, their system was horrendously corrupt. I mean, and then at a certain point, it just became a husk of a system where you got these, the dictators. They knew dick about dick. Yeah, they knew dick about dick. I'm standing by that comment. I'm standing by that. Alright guys, we've been doing this for like an hour and 30 minutes, and I honestly thought this video was only going to last like 15 minutes. So, I'm not saying Peter Joseph has all the right answers, but I do believe he's a good start. Yeah, Robert Fernandez, Venus Project. So, Peter Joseph's stuff is based on the Venus Project. The Venus Project by Jack Fresco. Fresco died last year, if I'm not mistaken, but Roxanne Meadows, is still running the organization. Like I said, she's been on the show. If look back at my old video where she's talking about it, I think it's a pretty decent interview. Mind you, I'm biased because it was coming out of my face. So yeah. Alright guys, I'm gonna finish this. I've been in a lot of pain and been sucking it up because of my audience. Not a huge amount. My stomach is killing me though. But I do have other shows that I want to do today. So within the next few minutes, I have another show lined up. It seems that Donald Trump or Mike Pence has been working with Iran and essentially taking money from terrorists in the Iranian in Iranian opposition. The story is fucking amazing. And there's another one, but oh, never mind. You did. Would you like to bring him on your show? Maybe. I don't know. I've been asked if I want to bring Jason on the show. I was thinking about sending him an invite. I'm not necessarily sure what we talk about. Maybe this. I don't necessarily have any qualms with him, I guess. I know that it's a perspective difference, if that makes sense. Like, he's further to the left than I am, or at the very least, more aggressively to the left in what he wants to bring about. I might send him an invite, though. Yeah, I might send him an invite. That should be interesting. I don't have any, I'm not sure what the topic would be. Maybe on Ocasio and whether, I guess, support of candidates like this. The problem with a conversation like that is I agree with him. I agree with him. It's like we're not in disagreement. We have, I do believe the capitalist system to some degree is a bribe. I do believe that putting people like Ocasio to some degree prevents revolutionary potential because, you know, if people are not hurting, then it's hard to kind of gin them up for some kind of revolution. I guess my disagreement is what happens on day 2 of the revolution. And how do you make sure that the revolution goes in a particular way? And what is revolution? Maybe I will bring him on the show. That might be fine. I love what the Venus Project is doing as well. Yeah. I guess I'm saying they're mostly the same. Lemmy Kinney. I've been watching Maoist Rebel News for 6 years probably. I agree with him once on North Korea and then TYT over the years, though I agree with TYT on nearly everything else. Well, my disagreement with him on this is specific in the video. I try to make it clear on what I agree with him on and what I disagree with him on. I don't dislike him though. I was enamored by him as I went through his videos, and it was like I think one of those things of I think I understand where he's coming from, but they're in a culture that I don't fully understand, like a subculture, having their own biases and problems and everything else, and I was fascinated by it. So yeah, I have no bad feelings with him at all. I just somewhat disagree with him on this one. But I'll end it here. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. And everyone that helped with the show today, thank you very much guys. I really do appreciate it. Yeah, it helps the show keep ticking along. When my wife and I leave, I think we're set to leave in September. I'm still going to be doing the show. Both of us are still going to have to work, and so my schedule is probably going to be tethered to hers. As she gets up in the morning, I'm probably going to also just get up in the morning and do my shows throughout the course of the day, so our schedules can be in some level of alignment. I guess, long story short, the show's not going anywhere. Even when it hits September and we travel, you're just going to see me at certain locations, and I'm probably going to be doing certain segments with people in those locations. Like if I get the opportunity to talk to somebody who's a political leader in that country, I want to try to take the opportunity, or talk to people about the political climate in those countries. I am absolutely going to take the opportunity. So I guess my point is, guys, thank you very much. You guys allow me to do this show, and I appreciate doing this show. So it's not a holiday, Grant. It's not until September, and it's not a holiday. My wife and I have been planning it, but we're just gonna kick off. We're gonna travel for as long as we can, anyway, or for as long as our energy holds up. But the show's not going anywhere. We're trying to figure out the logistics. So stuff like making sure you have high-speed internet, because her job is going to require her to have it, just like my job requires me to have it. Yeah, it's just a bunch of logistics stuff that you have to go from point A to point B. Then you have the medical stuff that you have to work out. Then you have setting it for September, and fingers crossed. We said we were going to do it last year. We were like, we're just going to go, we want to go travel. And I got to be honest, I didn't necessarily see it turning out in this very specific way. But there was no way to do it any other way. I know this sounds cryptic. I don't mean it to be cryptic. I just mean there's been a lot of weird, unforeseen things that have taken place that have kind of pushed us into odd ways but those odd ways is allowing us to essentially do what we wanted to do. So life is weird. All right, guys, I am going to end this, and I will see you probably in 10 minutes. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.